Ch.10 Mountain-locked ancient temple, forest of hanging corpses 2. The two dashed back to the temple of Mingguang. However, the back of the great hall was already absolutely empty, and there was only a pile of messily strewn red veils where those brides stood earlier. Seeing this sight, Xie Lian cried mentally, "This is bad, darn it, darn it." Then, he quickly picked up the veils on the ground. After he did so, he heard alarmed cries come from outside the temple. The two looked out the window and saw dozens of women in scarlet wedding dresses had formed a circle, slowly closing in on that group of villagers. Each of these women had pale and greenish faces carrying a smile, their arms raised at level. They were the corpses of those brides from earlier. No one could remain calm while watching helplessly as they slowly closed in. The crowd didn't care to grab that bandaged boy anymore and fled. Xie Ying immediately rushed over to support him. Xie Lian called out helplessly, "Don't run." He had lost count how many times he'd said this tonight. Whenever something happened, he'd have to say it at least 30 to 40 times, yet there would always be someone ignoring him. What a helpless affair. He waved his hand and the silk band ruoye flew out towards the sky, then he made a casual hand sign. And the silk band ruoye began whirling in the air on its own like the mad dance of a celestial being. Incredibly eye-catching. When those brides saw there was something over this way that was lively and rapidly spinning, its tail also whipping at them from time to time, a good number of them were lured over. There were also 7 that were attracted by the scent of blood in the deep of the forest, so they slowly hopped in that direction. Xie Lian exclaimed, "Follow them, Nan Feng. Don't let them go down the mountain." He didn't need to worry, Nanfeng had already gone off to chase them. 2 of the brides came attacking in Xie Lian's direction, their fingers bright red, their nails sharp. Xie Lian took out the red veils he had collected off the ground earlier, tossing them out with both hands. 2 of the veils spun as they shot out, covering squarely over the heads of those 2 brides. Instantly, their movements stalled. As expected, when the heavy, bright red veils covered the eyes and the noses of those brides' dead bodies, they could no longer see the shadows of mortals nor smell their scent. And since their corpses were stiff, they couldn't bend their own arms to remove the veils, they could only grab randomly at the air with their extended arms as if they were playing hide and seek. A scene like this was truly both horrifying and silly. Xie Lian stood in front of them and tentatively waved his hand in front of the 2 brides' eyes, and when he saw they were grabbing cluelessly in another direction, he contemplated for a moment. But, in the end, he still couldn't help but say, "Please forgive my impropriety," before seizing their arms and placing their claws on each other's necks. When the 2 brides suddenly felt something in their hands, their bodies shook, and since they couldn't see anything, they started strangling at each other viciously. Xie Lian then quickly ran off with a wide wave of his hand, and the silk band ruoye followed him like a streak of white rainbow before landing on the ground to form a large white circle. Xie Lian called after the people who were fleeing in all directions, "Everyone, go into the circle." The group hesitated as they ran, but Xie Ying immediately helped that bandaged boy over to stand inside. After some thought, she ran out again and dragged the little mob boss who was passed out on the ground in as well. Right then, one of the brides hopped to the edge of the white circle and her claws shot out to grab for them, yet it was as if there was a transparent wall that forcibly divided the space. Xie Lian noticed she couldn't hop in no matter how she tried, and quickly shouted, "Everyone come in quick. They can't come into this circle." When the men saw this, they hurried back like a hive of bees. Thankfully Xie Lian had the silk band Ruoye burst to a great length beforehand, and the circle was big enough, otherwise he would actually be worried. There would be people squeezed out because it was too cramped. The brides couldn't hop into the circle, and knew they couldn't do anything to this side, so they uniformly spun around and lunged in Xie Lian's direction while shrieking. However, Xie Lian had already been waiting for them, and from his sleeve he pulled out a large bundle of veils. The many red cloths in his hands spun, up, down, left, right, flying in all directions, both his hands and feet moving non-stop, covering each one as they came, swift and precise. With every bride veiled, the bride would begin to slow and feel around like a blind person. The veils in his hands were spun to blurs as they were thrown with ease, forming countless red silhouettes flying in the air. The people inside the circle actually started cheering in spite of themselves. Nice. Amazing, so amazing. You trained for this, right? Exclamation mark. When Xie Lian heard them, he blurted out of habit, "Thank you, thank you. Please support my act with money if you have the means, or support me with applause if you haven't. Wait." Only when the words had already come out did he notice something wrong. He'd actually got caught up and let slip the speech he used to say when he busked, and hurriedly stopped himself. While he was talking, several more brides jumped up, a jump that was surprisingly over 7 meters high and 3 meters far, and in the split of a second the stench of rot came before his eyes. Xie Lian pushed off with the tip of his foot, his body sweeping past them, and whilst in the air, he mentally chanted the verbal password to a certain private communication array. Ling Wen, the all-knowing. "I have a question. Do you know if the martial god of the north, General Ming Guang, had any intimate female friends?" Ling Wen's voice rang in his ear. "Your Highness, why do you ask?" "I've got a bit of a situation here right now, kind of urgent," Xie Lian said. "Not gonna lie, there are dozen dead people chasing me right now." "Ha! That awful." Ling Wen was shocked. "Not too horrible," Xie Lian said. "So, did he?" "I know this question is more personal in nature and it's not easy to answer, which was why I didn't ask in the general communication array. It's necessary for the mission. The information will never be divulged." "You've misunderstood, Your Highness," Ling Wen replied. "It's not that this question isn't easy to answer, but it's that All Pei really has had too many intimate female friends. Your question is so sudden, I don't know which one you're talking about at the moment." Xie Lian almost slipped in his step. "All right. Then, among General Pei's intimate female friends, is there one who is possessive, extremely jealous, and has some form of handicap?" "Now that you've mentioned it, I really do recall someone," Ling Wen replied. Xie Lian sent another 2 veils flying, causing another round of applause, and he spun around, cupping his hands at the audience in thanks. Tell me. Ling Wen began. Before All Pei ascended, he was a general. He befriended the female general of the enemy state on the battlefield, someone extremely beautiful and fierce in character. Her name was Xuan Ji. Okay, Xuan Ji, Xie Lian acknowledged. Ling Wen continued, General Pei is someone who, when he sees a beautiful woman, he'd have to go and entangle himself even if there's a blade to his throat. This woman led an army and crossed swords with him, and was defeated. Xuanji became a prisoner of war and was sent to the enemy camp. While the guards weren't paying attention, she was going to end herself on the spot. But she never succeeded. A general cut her verdant sword in half with one swing of his blade and saved her. This dashing General Pei of the enemy state was thus the General Ming Guang who later ascended. As for this General Pei, 1, he was always someone who cherished beauties, and 2, the result of the war was already determined, so even if the fighting continued back and forth, the situation was already impossible to flip. And so, Xuanji was released. All these 1s and 2s and backs and forths, it was easy to imagine what would occur. Just then, one of the brides caught Xie Lian's leg and dug her fingers in, almost sinking her claws into his flesh. He wanted to kick out at first, but realized at this angle he could only kick her face. Well, you can't hit a lady's face, Xie Lian thought, so he changed his position and kicked her shoulder instead, while sending another veil flying. Sounds like a beautiful tale. It was a beautiful tale at first, Ling Wen said. But what killed it was that Xuanji was adamant in being General Pei's lover for the rest of his life. Xie Lian ran a couple steps and leapt, scaling up the roof, then looked down at the 5 to 6 brides who continued to close in on him down below. He wiped his sweat. There isn't anything wrong for a woman to want to be the only lover in a lifetime. There isn't, Ling Wen said. But when 2 countries clash, the battlefield is heartless. Those 2 had originally willingly agreed that it was going to be a short-lived affair, that today would exist but not tomorrow, and speak only of romance and not of war. But someone like All Pei, I'll be honest, it's already pretty good if he doesn't cheat on you. However, Xuanji was a dignified lady general, and intense in temperament. If it was something she wanted, she'd clutch on firmly without ever letting go. Hold on, hold on. Xie Lian interrupted. Tell me first, is Xuanji handicapped? Where is she handicapped? It's her. Ling Wen's voice abruptly came to a stop. Goodness sakes, every time when he listened to the most important part, the bit of spiritual power he'd borrowed would run out. It seemed next time he'd have to get straight to the point right from the start. In between flying and jumping, Xie Lian rapidly reorganized his thoughts. If the bandaged boy wasn't the ghost groom, and this group of villagers had also confirmed that the ghost groom wasn't among them, then the only place left to hide was among the 17 brides. When he snuck into their fold, the ghost groom wasn't able to immediately spot that the numbers were wrong. On the flip side, when the ghost groom mixed in, Xie Lian also couldn't notice there was an extra corpse with only one look. Now that he thought about it closely, after the silk band Ruoye had injured the ghost groom, he only saw a ball of black smoke stealing for the forest, but he couldn't guarantee that the ball of black smoke contained a person for sure. What probably actually happened was that when he rushed out the temple entrance to give chase, the ghost groom remained in the temple full of black smoke, brushing past him and returning to the back of the hall, hiding itself like a leaf amongst the trees, and mixing in with the corpses of the brides. Then, the ghost groom wasn't a groom, but a bride, a woman dressed in a wedding dress. Since it was a woman, then many things could be explained. For example, why there was no temple Mingguang in or around Mount Yujun. It wasn't that the locals didn't want to build the temples, it was because they couldn't. Xie Lian had said every time the construction of a temple of Mingguang was in the works, there would always be a fire for some reason halfway through the construction. This didn't sound like a coincidence at all, and could be nothing but arson. Why set fire to burn temples? Under normal circumstances it was because of hatred. So then why would there be a temple of Mingguang on Mount Yujun that was locked within an enchantment without visitors, yet the maintenance and the craftwork of the divine statue within the temple were exquisite? Why was the ghost bride donned in a wedding dress herself, but couldn't bear to see other brides in wedding dresses smile when passing through Mount Yujun? When every dot was connected, other than jealousy and possessiveness, Xie Lian couldn't think of any other answers. And that odd sound, like cloth-covered sticks dragging something heavy, if it was truly the sound of footsteps, then Xie Lian could only think of one possibility. Every bride that was chasing him had been veiled. Xie Lian finally landed back onto the ground, let out a light sigh, steadied himself, then straightened up to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 10. 7 brides had hopped into the forest and Nan Feng had gone to chase them. He veiled 10 brides and they were all here. Then there was one more who hadn't shown. Right then, he heard that familiar sound of thump thump, thump thump, coming from behind him. Xie Lian slowly turned around, and an extremely short and small form reflected in his vision. He drew in a small breath and thought, I knew it. This short and small woman before his eyes was dressed in red wedding robes, but there was no air of joy, only sorrow. The reason she was short wasn't because that was her natural stature, but because she was kneeling on the ground. The bones of both her legs were already broken, but the legs remained, and she had been using her knees to walk all this time. The odd thump thump sound he heard was the sound of her dragging her 2 broken legs to hop on the ground. Ch.11 Mountain-locked ancient temple, forest of hanging corpses 3. That female ghost bore a handsome oval face, her brows high and arching, truly exceedingly beautiful. While her original beauty was laced with 3 parts heroism, it was now stormed with a blast of resentment, as if she had been trapped in a small, confined space for years, barred from the light of the sun. She was kneeling on the ground, and the bridal robe below the knees was tattered and frayed. No wonder people talked of it. Xie Lian and the ghost stared at each other unyieldingly for a while before he spoke up. Xuanji. It seemed it had been many years since anyone called her by that name. It was a long time before the resentment on her face faded some, and a flash of light shone in her eyes. Was it he who sent you to find me? She asked. Xie Lian supposed that this he naturally referred to that general pay. Xuanji then pressed on, what about the man himself? Why won't he come see me himself? That passionate expression and that hopeful tone while she spoke made Xie Lian feel that he best not say. It wasn't. Seeing that he hesitated to respond, Xuanji slumped onto the ground. Her back leaned against that handsome and tall martial god statue. Her bright red bridal robe spread about her on the ground like a giant flower of blood. Her hair was disheveled, her face filled with agonizing torment, as if she was suffering an extreme misery. Why won't he come see me? Xie Lian wasn't able to answer this question either, so he could only remain silent. Xuanji raised her head to gaze upon that divine statue and moaned sorrowfully. Pei dear, oh Pei dear, I've betrayed my kingdom for you, abandoned my everything and became like this. Why won't you come see me anymore? She pulled at her own hair, demanding, could your heart be made of iron? Xie Lian didn't react to any of this, but when he heard her, he silently pondered. Xuanji said she betrayed her kingdom for general pay. Could that mean that this general pay she spoke of tricked her into spilling enemy secrets while the two were in the heat of their passion, causing Xuanji's kingdom to fall into disadvantage on the battlefield? She also said that it was because of general pay that she'd become this. And by this, she naturally meant this tragic broken legs disposition. Xuanji was a woman general. Upon the battlefield, there was no way she was crippled, so those legs of hers could only have been broken later. Could this have something to do with general pay, too? Was it because of general pay abandoning what he had started that led to such deep and severe resentment? While Xie Lian felt everything he thought of was rather vulgar, with Xuanji having such profound resentment to the point where she was harming innocent lives, as vulgar as it was, Xie Lian could only force himself to think in this direction. Just then, the sound of a girl screaming suddenly came from outside the temple. Help! Help! Xie Lian and Xuanji both looked out of the window at the same time. Where Ruoye had formed the white circle, a man was trying to drag that bandaged boy out while Xiao Ying clung onto that man's leg, not letting go. That man started yelling curses. It was that little mob boss. Get the hell away. You dumbass, what if you call that female ghost over? Exclamation mark. Xiao Ying shouted, if she comes then she comes, you're scarier than any ghosts. I'd rather see a female ghost instead. Turns out that little mob boss Xie Lian, knocked out with one whip of his silk band, had come to. When he saw the sluggishly fumbling brides all around, he first jumped in surprise, but soon realized none of them could register humans. He was exceedingly gutsy, hot-headed and foolhardy, and he planned to drag this bandaged boy down the mountain to collect his bounty while everyone still didn't dare to move. He didn't care at all whether or not this boy was really the ghost groom everyone down the mountain said he was. So he was. Yet unexpectedly, Xiao Ying pounced over screaming and shouting, alerting all the drifting brides in the surrounding area, including Xuanji inside the temple of Mingguang. Xie Lian saw that it was him again, and mentally grumbled that he should have whipped harder earlier. Best if the man was whipped so hard he didn't wake for 3 days and 3 nights. He shouted, "Go back into the circle." The little mob boss saw a stream of black mist had come lunging at him, and hastily retreated. However, the bandaged boy was still in his grip, and Xiao Ying was still clinging onto his leg, so in the end he was still too slow by a beat. Instantly, the black mist enveloped him, and he was then sucked back to Xuanji's hand. He turned his head to look. Wasn't this disheveled, long-haired, haunting and chilling woman that beautiful corpse he had touched among all those brides lying on the ground earlier? Only having made it this far did he finally learn what fear meant. He wailed at the top of his lungs while Xuanji curled her 5 fingers, digging them deep into the back of his head. In an instant, his skull was pulled out from the heavy layer of flesh of his head. The skull that was just pulled out was still steamingly hot, its mouth still wide open and screaming. H. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. The people within the white circle also had their mouths open wide and screaming, so terrified their souls had left the bodies. H. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. Xiao Ying was also thoroughly terrified, pulling that bandaged boy into the circle as she screamed. Xuanji reached her fingers out at him again, but Xie Lian flashed over and blocked in front of her. "General, please refrain from further killing sins." He called her General in hope of reminding her that she was once a heroine who fought bravely at the front lines to protect her kingdom. Yet Xuanji crushed the head that was screaming in terror in her grip. That gorgeous face now 7 parts twisted. She sneered. "Is he too scared to see me?" Xie Lian couldn't think of any other way, and wondered if he should pretend to be someone sent by General Pei to smooth things over first. But Xuanji didn't need his response at all. She laughed heartily, then whipped around, pointing at that divine statue. "I burnt your temples and caused havoc in your land, just so you'd come to take one look at me. I've waited for you for years." She stared at that martial god statue with wide eyes for a good while, then she strangled its neck and started shaking it like mad. "But you still won't come to see me. Is it because you knew you wronged me? Won't you? Look at my legs. Exclamation mark. Look at how I am now. This is all for you. For you. Exclamation mark. Is your heart made of iron? Exclamation mark." Although as a bystander, Xie Lian didn't want to comment on who was right or wrong, but based on his own opinions, he really couldn't help but think, if you wanted to see him, could you not have used a saner method? In any case, if someone used this method because they wanted to see me, I would have zero desire to show up. On the other end, Xiao Ying and that bandaged boy finally returned to the circle anew. Looking his way, she whispered in concern, "Young master." Hearing her, Xie Lian gave her a smile, indicating that she needn't worry. Yet unexpectedly, the moment He smiled. Xuanji's face instantly contorted and she lunged over from the divine statue. Since you won't look at me and prefer to look at those girls who love smiling, then I'll let you look to your heart's content. Although the one she was strangling was Xie Lian, her words were directed at General Pei. Xie Lian had originally thought that Xuanji's heart was full of jealousy for those happily smiling brides in their sedans. Because she herself couldn't marry the one she loved. He hadn't expected that it was because this General Pei liked girls who smiled, so she, in her distorted mind, connected that to brides who were about to marry their lovers. No wonder she burnt all the Mingguang temples down the mountain. Now that he thought about it, it was probably because she couldn't stand having to share this one divine statue with all those women who'd visit Mingguang temples day in and day out. This female ghost was indeed a savage. Even with both legs broken, her movements were fast like a devil. And even after having been beaten by Ruoye, her strength was still formidable. Xie Lian couldn't keep it up. With her strangling him like this, and just as he was about to summon Ruoye, there was a loud cry. That girl Xiao Ying saw that he couldn't hang on anymore, so she picked up a branch and came charging over, yelling as she charged, seeming to be pumping courage for herself. Xuanji didn't even need to lift a finger. She only gave a chilling look, and before Xiao Ying had even gotten close, she was sent flying meters away, crashing heavily and head first. That bandaged boy croaked out a loud "ah" as he ran over. Xie Lian was shocked too, but right as he sat up, he felt a chill on the back of his head. Xuanji's 5 fingers were already in place, seeming like she was going to yank his skull from his skin just like earlier. Under this dire situation, Xie Lian's right hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. He shouted, "Bind." A sharp whoosh sound broke through the air, and the white silk bandage heeded the command, circling and twisting about Xuanji, tying her up. Xuanji's legs were broken, so she couldn't dodge in time. Thus, with a heavy thud, she fell to her knees and started rolling on the ground, trying to break free of this white silk band. Yet the more she struggled, the tighter the bind became. The moment he was set free, Xie Lian didn't even take a moment to catch his breath before he immediately got to his feet and ran to where Xiao Ying was. Even with Ruoye recalled, the crowd still didn't dare to move rashly, but there were also a number of daring villagers who had gotten used to those fumbling brides and came circling. That bandaged boy was kneeling next to Xiao Ying's sprawled form, not knowing what to do, so anxious he was like a small insect on the rim of a boiling pot. No one dared touch her, afraid that she had broken something critical, and if she should struggle, the injury would get worse. Xie Lian gave a quick once-over, and knew that no matter how careful he was, it'd be pointless. To have fallen like this, there was no way she'd survive. While he hadn't interacted much with this girl, Xiao Ying hadn't even spoken with her much, Xie Lian still knew that she was a kind-hearted girl despite her ugly appearance. Such an ending for her truly made one's heart sink. On the other end, Xuanji shouldn't be able to struggle free of Ruoye. Xie Lian thought, even if it's pointless, she shouldn't be left in this position right before her death. And so, he very carefully flipped her over. Xie Ying's face was covered with blood, and the crowd around clicked their tongues and sighed as they watched. However, she still had breath left, and she whispered, "Young master, have I made things worse?" Although she didn't make anything worse, she certainly didn't actually help either. Xie Lian was already going to summon Ruoye at the time, and didn't require anyone else's help. Besides, with that single branch of hers, even if she had managed to hit Xuanji, it wouldn't have done anything, never mind that she wouldn't have been able to get near the female's ghost's body in the first place. With all that, this could be said to be a completely meaningless death. Xie Lian answered her, "No. You've been a great help. You see, the moment you came over, the female ghost's attention was diverted, which was how I was able to have the time to subdue her. Thank you so very much. But you can't do that again next time, all right? If you're going to help, you have to tell me first. Otherwise, if I don't pick up on it, things will be toast." Xie Ying chuckled. "Sigh, young master, you don't need to comfort me anymore. I know I wasn't any help. And there won't be a next time." Her words were jumbled and unclear, and when she spat out a mouthful of blood, there were even a few broken front teeth mixed in. That bandaged boy was shaking with panic, Wu Ying, trying to speak. Xie Ying turned to him. "Don't go down the mountain to steal food anymore in the future. If anyone finds out, they'll beat you to death. If he ever gets hungry, he can come to me," Xie Lian said. Xie Ying's eyes lit up hearing this. "Really? Then, thanks so much." She smiled and smiled, until suddenly 2 lines of tears streamed down from that pair of tiny eyes. She said quietly, "I feel I haven't lived through many good days in all my life here in this world." Xie Lian didn't know what to say, and gently patted her hand. Xie Ying then sighed. "Sigh, never mind, maybe I'm just born unlucky." Those words certainly did sound a little funny, and, since her nose was bent, her eyes slanted, her face so ugly it was silly, it was kind of funny to see such a face covered in blood and tears. With tears still rolling down, she choked, "But even then, I still. Her breathing stopped, and she passed with those words. That bandaged boy saw that she had died, and started to weep quietly while hugging her dead body. His head was buried in her belly, like he had lost her dependent. He didn't dare to raise his head up no matter what. As for Xie Lian, he reached out and helped close her eyes, speaking to her mentally, "You're stronger than me." Right then, the sound of a bazaar bell tolled. Clang, clang, clang. 3 roaring tolls later, all of a sudden Xie Lian felt his head go dizzy, and he wondered out loud, "What's going on?" Then he looked all around. All the brides had collapsed to the ground, only their arms still up and reaching to the sky. The crowd of villagers had also slumped, as if they were all knocked out by this series of quaking bells. Xie Lian himself felt his head rather heavy, and forced himself to stand with his hand supporting his forehead, but his legs went weak and he fell with one knee to the ground. Fortunately, someone helped support him. When Xie Lian looked up, it was Nan Feng. Turns out the moment those 7 brides entered the forest, they instantly spread out. Nan Feng almost ran all over the entirety of Mount Yujun before he managed to capture all of them, and he had only just returned. Seeing him quite calm, Xie Lian immediately asked, "What's with that bell?" "Don't worry, it's reinforcements," Nan Feng replied. Xie Lian looked over following his gaze, and only then did he notice that, before the temple of Ming Guang, a row of soldiers had appeared, standing there since who knows when. Each of these soldiers were donned in armor, emitting sharp and awe-inspiring auras, and their bodies were enveloped with a thin layer of spiritual light. In front of the soldiers there stood a poised, elegant, and tall young military general, obviously not a mortal. That military general approached with his hands clasped behind his back, and came before Xie Lian, bending slightly at the waist. "Your Highness." Xie Lian hadn't yet opened his mouth to make inquiries before Nan Feng whispered next to him, "This is General Pei." Xie Lian instantly took a glance at Xuan Ji, who was on the ground. General Pei. This General Pei didn't quite match what he had imagined, and was also grossly different than the divine statues. That divine statue's heroic form was vivacious, its eyes spirited and energetic, a handsomeness that was aggressive and invasive. While this young military general was also handsome, his complexion was pale, and his brows were as calm as cool jade. There was no sense of a murderous aura, only a rippleless tranquility. He was a military general, but he could be said to be a tactician. General Pei noticed Xuan Ji, who was on the ground, and spoke. "The palace of Lingwen informed us that the incident at Mount Yujun this time might be related to our palace of Ming Guang, and so this servant has come. I didn't expect that it really did have something to do with us. We have troubled your Highness." Xie Lian thanked Lingwen mentally. He wondered, how in the world was the palace of Lingwen inefficient? He replied, "General Pei is working hard too." Xuan Ji, who was in the middle of struggling faintly, heard the words General Pei, and suddenly looked up, demanding enthusiastically, "Pei dear, Pei dear. Is that you? Have you come? Have you finally come?" She was bound by Ruoye, and as overjoyed as she was, she could only rise into a kneel. Yet unexpectedly, the moment she saw that military general, her face instantly blanched. "Whou! Exclamation mark. On this end, Xie Lian had already given Nan Feng a general account of just what the ghost groom affair was about. When he heard her question, he responded, "Isn't this General Pei? Could she have waited for too long, and doesn't recognize him anymore?" "This is General Pei," Nan Feng answered. "But it's not the one she's waiting for." Xie Lian was confused. "And there are 2 General Peis?" Yet Nan Feng replied, "That's correct. There are indeed 2 of them." Turns out the General Pei this female ghost Xuan Ji was waiting for was the main god of the temple of Ming Guang. The one before them now was the deputy god of the palace of Ming Guang, a descendant of the other General Pei. In order to differentiate the 2, everyone addressed this one as General Pei Jr. In legitimate Ming Guang temples, both must be worshipped, one facing the front, and one facing the back. General Pei was the principal god of the main hall, so his divine statue faced the entrance of the temple hall, whereas General Pei Jr.'s divine statue was set up behind the back. While he was of a later generation of his ancestor, by looks they appeared no different than brothers. Two ascendees from one household was definitely considered a fantastic tale. Xuanji scanned the area and didn't see the one she wanted to see among the soldiers either. She cried bitterly, "Where's Pei Ming? Why hasn't he come? Why won't he come and see me?" General Pei Jr. inclined his head and replied, "General Pei has important business to tend to." Xuanji muttered, "Important business." Underneath the long hair draping over her face, tears were streaming. "I've waited for him for hundreds of years. What important business could he have? Back then, in order to see me, he could cross half the border in one night. What important business could he have now? So important that he can't even come down to spare me a look. Is there anything? I don't think there is." "General Xuanji, please be on your way," General Pei Jr. said. From the troop, two soldiers from the palace of Mingguang approached and pulled off Ruoye from Xuanji's person. After it affectionately wrapped itself back around Xie Lian's wrist, he gently patted it twice to comfort it. Xuanji allowed herself to be grabbed by those two soldiers and was blank for a moment when suddenly she started struggling with force, cursing while pointing to the heavens. "Pei Ming, I curse you." This screech was sharp, and Xie Lian was taken aback, thinking to himself, "Isn't this cursing the ancestor before the descendant?" That General Pei Jr., however, didn't react at all. He said expressionlessly, "Please excuse us." Xuanji was screaming until she became hoarse. "I curse you. You best never fall in love with anyone, otherwise if that day should come, I'll curse you to be just like me, to burn with the fire of love unceasingly, forever and ever. The fire of love will burn your body, scorch your heart, your liver, your organs." Right then, General Pei Jr. greeted Xie Lian and the others, "Excuse us. Please wait a moment." Then he raised his middle and index finger and lightly pressed them against his temple. This was the spell to activate the spiritual communication array, so he must be communicating with someone. A moment later, he ended and dropped his hand, clasping it behind him again, and turned to Xuanji. "General Pei wants me to tell you that's impossible." Xuanji screeched, "I curse you!" Exclamation mark! Exclamation mark! General Pei Jr. waved his hand slightly and ordered, "Take her away." The two soldiers carried Xuanji, who was struggling like crazy, and dragged her away. Xie Lian spoke up, "General Pei Jr., might I ask, how will this Xuanji be handled?" "Sealed under the mountain," General Pei Jr. replied. To find a mountain as a seal was certainly the usual way the heavenly realm dealt with monsters and ghosts. Humming heavily for a moment, Xie Lian still spoke up. "This General Xuanji's resentment is quite strong. She couldn't let go of the hatred stemming from betraying her kingdom for General Pei. Perhaps sealing isn't the right long-term solution." General Pei Jr., however, only inclined his head. "She said she betrayed her kingdom because of General Pei." "She certainly did say so," Xie Lian said. "That it was because of General Pei that she became like this." Whether that's the truth, though, I don't know. If it must be said this way, it's not altogether wrong, General Pei Jr. said. She did betray her kingdom for General Pei. However, the details in between might be different than what bystanders might imagine. After she and General Pei separated, in order to retain him, General Xuanji offered up military intelligence of her own volition. General Pei was unwilling to win unfairly, so he didn't take the offer. Well now, he had never thought that the whole "I betrayed my kingdom for you" was actually like this. Xie Lian replied, then when she said both her legs were broken, it was also because of General Pei. It was. She broke those legs herself, General Pei Jr. answered. Broke them herself. General Pei Jr. replied emotionlessly, General Pei doesn't like forceful women, but General Xuanji has a strong character, which was why they couldn't be together for long. General Xuanji couldn't accept it, and told General Pei that she was willing to sacrifice for him and change herself. Thus she ruined her own martial skills, and broke her own legs. With this, it was like she destroyed both her wings in order to tie herself to General Pei's side. General Pei never abandoned her to her own devices, and kept her to take care of her, but in the end he never wanted to marry her. General Xuanji's wish was never fulfilled, and so she killed herself in resentment. Not for anything else, but just so General Pei would be sad. But pardon my bluntness. The way he spoke had always been polite and overly calm. That would never happen. Xie Lian rubbed his forehead and didn't speak, thinking to himself, who the heck are these people? General Pei Jr. continued, I don't know the right and wrong of all this, either. I only know that if General Xuanji was willing to let go, things wouldn't have to be this way. Your Highness, this servant will take his leave now. Xie Lian also raised his hands in a courtesy greeting and sent him off. Nan Feng commented, weirdos. Xie Lian thought inwardly, he himself was the laughingstock of the three realms, an infamous weirdo, so he best not comment on anyone else. This was something between General Pei and Xuanji, so for bystanders, there was no point in discussing who was right or wrong. Only, the sympathies went out to all 17 of those innocent brides, and all the military officials and sedan drivers who escorted them, but suffered a disaster for no reason. Having brought up the subject of the brides, Xie Lian instantly turned his gaze to look, and saw the 17 corpses of the brides had started to show various stages of deterioration. Some had already become white bones, while some were starting to rot, emitting waves of foul odor. The stench roused the people lying on the ground, and they gradually came to, but when they saw the scene, they jumped in shock and terror once more. Using this chance, Xie Lian nagged at them to spread the philosophy of good and bad karma, advising them to pray lots for each of the brides once they went back down the mountain, and to think of a way to contact the families of those brides to come and collect their corpses. He also cautioned that they must never commit the same deeds as those corpse sellers, and they shouldn't commit any wrongdoings either. After such a thrilling night, and now with the leading provocateur gone, no one else dared to speak against Xie Lian, and each acknowledged him apprehensively, all of them feeling like they just had a nightmare. Only then did they notice that they acted as if they were possessed. There were so many dead people, how did they still only have money in their minds? Thinking back, they all thought it horrifying. The night before, everyone was doing the same thing, with a mob and a leader. They all rushed in without thinking. Now that they harbored fear in their minds, they very earnestly repented and prayed for blessings. The day hadn't yet broken, and fearing that there might be wolves and others stirring trouble, even though Nanfeng had just run a huge circle around the whole mountain, he had to take this large group of people down the mountain. He didn't complain, however, and arranged with Xie Lian to discuss afterwards what was to be done of that upside-down corpse-hanging forest. When that bandaged boy woke up, he sat next to Xiao Ying's corpse once more, hugging her, not saying a word, and so Xie Lian also sat down next to him. He spent a while coming up with a script, but just as he was about to speak to comfort him, Xie Lian suddenly noticed that this boy's head was bleeding. If it was blood from the corpse forest, then it should have dried, but this blood was still dripping, so it could only be that he was injured. Right then, Xie Lian told him, "Your head is wounded, take off your bandages and let me take a look." That boy slowly looked up, and those bloodshot eyes glimpsed at him, like he was scared and hesitant. Xie Lian smiled gently. "Don't be afraid. If there's a wound, then it must be dressed. I promise I won't be scared off by you." That boy hesitated for a moment, then turned around, and circle by circle he slowly unwrapped the bandages around his head. His movement was very slow, but Xie Lian waited for him very patiently, and was already pondering the issues that would come after. This boy for sure can't stay at Mount Yujun anymore, but where can he go? He can't come back to the heavens with me, and I don't even know when my next meal is. I'll have to think of a dependable way to settle him. And the green ghost, Qi Rong. Just then, that boy had finished removing the bandages and turned around. And just as Xie Lian saw that face in its entirety, he felt all the blood in his veins had drained thoroughly.